In this chapter, I'm going to show how I set up Maya. So here, make sure under settings, you are working in centimeters. Save it. Then under display grid, open the option box. These are the default values, but I like to change this to 100 divided by 10 and divided by 1. Here I like also to change the colors to blue. And apply. You can also display the numbers on the axis or along the edges. So apply and close. Now, if we measure this with a measure tool under create, measure tool distance, you can see that snapping with the X key, 1 unit is 10 centimeters. Now I'm going to show you why I changed the grid. If I import a mesh, a base mesh, which is modeled to a height of 180 centimeters, we can see that this fits perfectly in the grid. And it's very easy for me to measure distances by 10 centimeters. I can show you going back to the default settings, what happened. Reset settings and apply. You can see that the grid is really tiny for a character. I don't really need to measure 1 centimeter, but I need something much more manageable. So I go back to 100 divided by 10 by 1. You can see that this is much more manageable and easy to use. Let's have a look now at the ZBrush user interface. This is a user interface that I customized, and I put a lot of the tools on the right side. For example, the brushes, the alpha, the material. But it's very personal. I'm going to give you this UI so you can load it and practice with it. And I show you how to do it. Basically, you go under Preferences, Enable Customize, and you can see that it's expanding. So you have a bit more room to move your buttons. Let's say that you have some brushes that you use very often. You can move it using pressing Ctrl Alt and dragging. You can move the buttons here. Let's say you have another brush that you like, Ctrl Alt again, and move the button. What you're doing is not really moving the buttons, you're copying the buttons. So you have a duplicate here and here. You can move also other buttons. Let's say, for example, you want to move the divide button, Ctrl Alt again, and drag it here. And then you have a faster access to this button. If you don't like it, you can move it by Ctrl Alt again, drag it into the viewport, and get rid of the button. Once you have a user interface that you like, you just go under Preferences, Disable, and then Save UI. Another thing that I do, I get rid of this gradient in the background because I find it pretty distracting, and I think that having a solid background make it much easier to read the silhouette of the character. So I go under Document here and move the range slider at 0. Here is how you can create new palettes. Create new. For example, you want to create an extra palette with more brushes. You can call brush B, for example. And then take this brush B here and move it to the side. So once you have it here, drag any brush that you like with Ctrl Alt again here, and then another brush, for example, and another brush. So let's say you like this combination of brushes. You go under Preferences again, Configuration, disable this button, then Ctrl-Alt click on the brush and assign a hotkey. For example, now I choose K, and when I press K, the brushes will be here. This will be really fast, and this is going to speed up my workflow. I have some buttons already assigned. For example, for Wool Slash, I have quite a lot of brushes here, and that make it really easy and fast to access them. And then I have another menu, which is Ctrl A. Under this one, I have a lot of controls of the geometry. For example, I can reduce and increase the subdivision level. I can divide more. I have crease and crease. I have Dynamesh. I also have materials that I use a lot, so I can switch fast materials, Polygroup, and Polypaint. You will see this over the next few chapters. Another menu I use a lot is the deformation menu. I set a key that is Ctrl-Alt-A. I can do a lot of functions here. For example, delete by symmetry, mirror and weld. And this is located here under deformation. As you can see, there are way too many options. So I just use this one instead and make my workflow much easier and faster. Another thing that you should note is also under the draw menu, the focal length of your camera. So 50mm is the ideal one that I use a lot, which is very close to the human eyes, or 85mm, especially for portrait and character, where 18, 24, 28 and 35 deform quite a lot the perspective. So I really strongly recommend to use 50 and 85. You can also lock the camera here. This is quite useful, so you don't risk to move your character while you're sculpting, for example, especially if your character is really big in frame. It's good habit to lock the camera, so you don't risk to move the character or the object you're sculpting by mistake. Another important factor in ZBrush is the scaling. ZBrush has its own internal scaling and unit system, which doesn't correspond to any other software. It's very, very unique of ZBrush. ZBrush prefers to have object built at 2 unit size. If we go under geometry, we can see that this primitive in size is 2 units. And if we scroll down to export, we can see the export value is at 0. If we measure with the measuring tool here, we can see it's roughly around 2 units. Now, if, for example, we change the scaling at 2, we can see that this acts as a multiplier. So basically we are multiplying this factor with the 2 units, and it's 4. It's around 4. Now this is very, very important, because if we don't respect this internal scaling of ZBrush, some tools are not going to work properly. For example, the brush size is not going to work correctly. The focal length is not going to work correctly, and Dynamesh as well is not going to work correctly. I can demonstrate this by showing you 2 meshes. This is a base mesh, by the way, that was made by Jared Vincent. You can find the link in the description of the tutorial. So this is built at correct scaling. In fact, if we go under geometry, the scale is the size is 2, and the export is around 90. So 90 by 2 is 180 centimeters high. So when we export this into Maya, this will be the correct size. There is also another mesh which I have here, and this was previously scaled to centimeters, but as you can see, this is really big. If we go close, you can see that the brush size is not working correctly. See, this is a brush size of 1 and it's way too small. This is 5, it's very small. Also, the focal length is not really going to work correctly. You can see if I switch from 50 to 85, it's 0 effect. 35, 28, 0 effect. Here, this is scaled at the proper size. You can see that the brush size is correct. And if we change focal length, the perspective is changing correctly. So the best way to build the scene in ZBrush at the correct scaling is this. I go into Maya and I create a cube of 180 centimeters, export this, and then I re-import this into ZBrush. So 180 centimeters cube, and this set the correct scaling. Now, for example, I can append the character, and you can see that this is correct. And now, from now on, when I'm going to export and re-import into Maya, back and forth, and into other applications such as Marvelous Designer, everything will work correctly because we are respecting the internal size of ZBrush, and also when we are exporting at the correct size into centimeters in Maya or any other application.